Hello, my name is Carol May Whittick, spiritual life coach and your host of Her Conversations, Tools for the Awakening. Her is an acronym for Higher Energetic Resonance. This is the optimal state to embody in order to attract our highest desires. What is the awakening? This is the moment in time when humanity rises up out of the darkness. Who is awakening? Each one of us present on earth today, reclaiming our sovereignty, seeking greater possibilities in our reality and looking for solutions. We know being awakened is not a lofty ideal but a necessity. If we can transform ourselves, we can change the world. Guests on Her Conversations will speak to your spirituality, sensuality and soul. Listen to their stories and hear how they are in service to the world. Let their words and these conversations embolden and inspire you. Before we get into this week's episode with Vicky Midwood, I'd like to share with you some ways that I can support you. Firstly, you can tune into Her Inspirations, which is the sister podcast to this title, where in each episode I explore a different aspect of our spiritual and creative journeys. And also, if you choose to and join the mailing list, you'll receive emails with additional teaching points and resources for you to explore deeper on your own personal journey. If you're someone who's always wanted to be heard in the world, whether that means your own podcast, social media content, public speaking, or showing up in your life, I've created Your Awakened Voice for you. This is my course which uses my holistic approach and acknowledges the intricate connection between physical body, mind, and spirit. This course empowers you to discover and develop your own voice. And there's still time, if you're listening to this before the 14th of April, if you enter the code Easter, you'll receive 50% off the cost of the course. Or if you're ready to work with me on a one-to-one basis, if you know that there's a purpose to your life, my purpose is to support you. I'm guiding you to trust your intuition, rediscover your innate creativity, and use your decades of wisdom to design your purposeful life. The links to all of these are in the show notes. My guest this week is Vicky Midwood. She's a health coach specialising in belly fat and addiction elimination. She helps professional women over 40 to stop turning to food and drink under pressure. During our conversation, Vicky speaks about how mental illness is often misdiagnosed and the root cause could stem from thyroid issues. She also shares about her own path to wellness and the importance of women prioritising their health. So as always, I begin by asking my guest. Her is an acronym for Higher Energetic Resonance. When do you feel that higher energetic resonance?
Hi, I think for me, the higher energetic resonance comes first thing in the morning when I am so grateful to realise that I'm still alive. Now, that might sound dramatic, but for me, with my history, every single day that I wake up, I am so grateful that I've got another day here on this planet. And I am one of those annoying people who does jump out of bed because I can't wait to get going.
Beautiful. And I love that as well, because I was having a conversation with somebody who was in her, she'd say 43, and she was just having just a terrible time of where her mind was like, you know, I'm too old and my life's over and I've ruined the past 20 years of my life. I'm just like really in a funk of space, you know, and it was like, I'm like, but you do realize, and I just kept saying, the only thing I could think to say to her is like, but you do realize that you're alive though.
Come back to basics.
Yeah.
I am fortunate. You know what? I have a brain that seems to be functioning. I've got all of my limbs that are working. Yeah, I have a roof over my head. I woke up in a bed and I am able to get out of that bed and actually start my day. And, you know, I don't need anything more than that, really. Well, I do. I need other humans as well. But yeah, that's the important thing. And it's recognizing that if we can just come back to the basics, I think a lot of us, and I think maybe that's where that lady was coming from, we look at what we haven't got, or as we get older, maybe what we haven't done yet that we thought we should have, or we hoped we might have done. But if we can just each morning start the day going, hey, here I'm here. I get a chance to live another day. because I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow.
Exactly, because, there are so many people that I've known over my lifetime that just literally aren't physically here. Before we get deeper into our conversation, Vicky, I just want to give you a moment to share a little bit about your journey and what got you to doing the work that you are doing today.
Thank you so much. So my journey has, obviously, like everybody's journey, many, many levels, but to keep it as succinct and short as I can, I had issues with my body weight and size. I thought I was too big. I tried to get smaller by following diets, as most people do, 10 or 11 at secondary school. I was the kind of well-built, chunky one, and I didn't want to be. I couldn't diet. I couldn't stick to it. I discovered that I could stick my fingers down my throat and throw up. And so basically that was how I lost weight, in a very drastic way. Along route, I decided that it would be an excellent idea to become a fitness instructor, because then I could exercise legitimately like a crazy person and nobody would think anything about it. So the world of health and wellness I stepped into really as a way of keeping me stuck in my exercise addiction and my food and body image stuff. Alcohol came into the mix as well, just to add something else to the party. And long story short, I ended up finally in rehab. And that was in 2005 for the alcohol. All good, all great, except when I came out, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do with my life. And I decided to go down the road of teaching people to become personal trainers, because whilst I had been in the fitness industry, I recognized very early on in my career there were so many gaps in my learning and understanding. One of them being menopause. One of my first clients is just naive, having come out of personal training qualification, was talking to me about these symptoms that I now know were menopause, but then I had no clue what she was talking about. I was 21 years old, and this was like an alien concept to me. So I realized early on that I needed to learn more. And so even though I was in my addiction, I was very much functioning in it, and therefore kidding myself that I was fine, I was different, I was this invincible person who wouldn't be affected. And unfortunately, all of those years had a massive effect on my gut function, my brain function, to the extent that I ended up with feelings of depression that I couldn't shake off. And I was really worried that maybe there was mentally something wrong with me. I finally got some blood testing done and discovered that I had a thyroid issue called Hashimoto's. And that was leading to all kinds of weird symptoms, which I was then able to connect to my mum, who had an illness that we now call bipolar, but then it was called manic depression. And a lot of the symptoms overlapped. So I decided to find out how to treat this without medication, conventional medication, but also to really get deep into nutrition and understand, why did I have this leaky gut? What was it? What had happened? And it was all related to my alcohol addiction, my food. But even before that, it was related to my health as a child. And so this is the stuff now that got me into doing what I do, because I had no clue about this stuff. And if I had, I'm sure I wouldn't have struggled so hard to help myself to heal and get better. And the stuff that I help people to do now is actually not complicated. But people need to understand the origins of things, and that's what we don't get from the medical profession. So it's become my passion to help people not spend their life on medication, to take responsibility for their own health by understanding and reconnecting to how their body works, because we're all unique. And so that's what I do. I try and simplify what seems complicated and help people make it practical and sustainable.
So what would you say is the most obvious to you? Point one, simplified nutrition, the point that most of us miss and don't understand and never really get educated on. So therefore we go off on another tangent of what we think is right, or what we grow up around, and then ultimately end up in varying different stages or places of disease.
Yeah, where can people are not going to like it.
Well, we never like the truth, but it always pees you off first, doesn't it? The truth.
It absolutely does. Yeah. So we need to go back to basics on food, in that we need to focus on one ingredient foods. So in other words, the food that we should look exactly the same when it put it in our mouth as it did when you picked it from the tree or pulled it out of the ground or fished it out of the water, right? It should look the same. Okay. We might have to do a little bit of peeling or scrubbing or chopping or perhaps some cooking, but ultimately that's what we need to focus on. And we need to focus on variety. Variety is key for gut function. We're all very much, I think, in today's world, in a kind of bubble where we have access to the same sorts of foods, and we've lost what is seasonal. We don't know anymore what are seasonal fruits, what are seasonal vegetables. So if we can eat seasonally, we will naturally get the variety that our body needs to function well. So that is number one key. Eat really very simple food in the state that it was grown and picked.
Does that look like a potato? Yes, it does.
Does that look like it? Yeah, exactly that. You know, when you look at something like a cornflake, does it look anything like an ear of corn? No, it doesn't. You look at a corn on the cob and then you look at your packet of cornflakes. They're not the same. The problem is, it's easy for me to say that. It's not that easy for people to do because it's more time consuming to prepare meals with one ingredient foods, and we're time poor these days, or we seem to be. So it's a case of, I think, helping people to recognize that you don't have to cook every day from scratch. Just get kind of strategic with your time, and instead of cooking every day, try and make enough for sort of 3 days in one go, and then you don't have to cook again from scratch. So it can be done, and it's cheaper. This is one of the things that people say, oh, it's so much more expensive to eat healthy. No, it's not. It's actually flipping expensive to eat rubbish food. Takeaways are expensive. Ready meals are expensive, right? When you're cooking from scratch, so much goes much, much further, and you get the opportunity to put in your own flavors and herbs and spices and make it interesting to your taste.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. And one of the things that I always find quite amusing at the moment is the way that these delivery boxes of meals, they do like meal plans for you as well. I don't need to name anyone. Like, people know what I mean. And the way that they're marketing themselves and the people that they're marketing to, so it's usually like a kind of 30-something, where it's like, oh gosh, I've just got no more time, and at least I've got the recipe cards, and there's no waste and anything. It's like, whenever was it a problem to have like a little bit of a spice rack going on in your in your house as well,
But I have to say, because I am a person who likes to find out what these things are all about, I buy in and I sign up to all kinds of things purely from a place of, I'm just curious. I want to know how it works. I want to know what you get. Are you being sold what you think you're being sold? So we've used the Hello Fresh, which is one of the ones. As you say, there's a number of companies, and that's a particular one that we've used. And I have to say that if people are new to cooking from scratch and they don't genuinely know what things go with what, it's a flipping good starting point to get them into the habit of recognizing, actually, by the time you've prepared it and cooked it from scratch, it's the same length of time as it takes to put a ready meal in the oven that normally takes 20 to 30 minutes to heat through. So when they get into the habit of doing it, I think it's like anything, it's a stepping stone, isn't it? It's like when you start to have your driving lessons, right, you don't really know what you're doing, and you need somebody to say, that's this, do that, blah, blah. And then you can go off on your own. And I think they have a place, because I believe we've missed not just one, but potentially 3 generations now of people who just don't know how to cook. When I see people holding a knife, they don't know how to hold a knife, how to chop properly. And the irony is, the most watched programs are cooking programs that people don't cook.
That aspirational, turning out the ideal meals. And I don't know, I grew up having, like, I was in the kitchen and like a girl from a Jamaican family, like you're not going anywhere else. You're
Right.
front and center and you watch and you see how everything's done. And also because there wasn't a huge amount of money going around as well, we learned how to cook in massive ways. Like every now and again, my mum bought, I think it was like a 10 kilogram bag of rice, and like
Right.
we'd use that, and that would last for months. And then when the rice sack was done, then we'd make a rug out of the rice, like nothing
Yeah.
went to waste as well. There
Yeah.
was always something going on.
Perfect.
So then for me, but it wasn't until then I left home and started to live with other people that I realized they absolutely 100% had no clue
Yeah.
how to cook, and it was like a phenomenon for them. And then also, as I was going out into the world, that's when convenience meals really start, before we even had like the delivery boxes, HelloFresh and those types,
Yeah.
the ready meals and microwaves then really started to come in, and the prevalence, it's like pretty much every household has them, and the idea of convenience then overrides what you know to be true about what your body needs, and not being in touch with your body like on a level to really know what hunger is.
And that's something that's key, because many people don't know what hunger is. And this is, I think it's very much a society thing, because it starts when we go to school. Now, I'm old enough to have gone to a school where there was no such thing as a tuck shop, and there was no such thing as a vending machine. They didn't exist at infant school, for sure. When I went to secondary school, we had one machine in the whole school, and that was a drinks dispensing machine. And I'd never seen one before. I mean, it was like, whoa. Our school meals were made on the premises from fresh ingredients, right? Nowadays, it is completely different. We've got a school system where kids have a break, and that break in their heads is, this is when you eat food. Hungry or not, that's what you do. We've been taught that you need to go to school and you have to have breakfast as soon as you get up. Whether you're hungry or not, it doesn't even come into it. This is what you're taught to do. So very early on, we're taught to override our body's natural cues of hunger and full up. Depending on the school, depending on your culture, you may have been taught that you can't leave the table until you've eaten everything on your plate. Well, if I'm full, I don't want any more. Right. So you've then been taught to actually override your body's systems and actually ignore them. So is it any wonder that we get very quickly and very easily out of touch with what is true hunger? And for a lot of people, that can lead to disordered eating or an eating disorder. Because they don't like this feeling, somebody's telling me what else to do and my body's trying to tell me something else. It's very difficult. And the majority of people I speak to genuinely don't know. Most of them say to me when they're working with me with eating disorders, particularly emotional eating or bulimia, that they actually have to stop and ask themselves, when was the last time I ate because I was genuinely hungry? Right. I'm bored. It's a distraction. It's entertainment. Well, everybody else is, because it's there. Well, because it's lunchtime, because it's tea time. And it's like, where does your body's needs come into this? Most of us are so out of touch. And that's why I think this idea that people want to try fasting, which a lot of people are talking about, and these things go in waves. If you've been around this field long enough, I've been in it for 32 years, you'll see that everything comes around. It's a bit like fashion industry and clothing. Everything comes around again eventually. So fasting is now quite a hot topic again at the moment. And is fasting a good idea? It does help you actually genuinely getting back in touch with true hunger. It absolutely does. But unfortunately, there's then this idea that there is one way to fast and there's a right way to do it. And that's just ridiculous, because women shouldn't fast in the same way that men do. If you're having your cycle, you're going to be fasting differently to somebody who is in menopause, right? And it's not for everybody. If you've had an eating disorder, we ain't going to entertain going down that road until you get your relationship with your body and food in a better space and place. But yeah, there's so many reasons why our food has gone in a completely different way, to the fact that actually it's about nutrients and it's about nourishing your cells so that we can function. Everything starts with a cell. Cells become organs, organs become tissues, tissues become systems. And then we have ourselves as a whole person. And we just forget that if your cells don't function right, doesn't matter where the cell is, in your brain, in your gut, in your foot, it doesn't matter, right? They have to have the nutrients to function. If they don't, when they replicate, then they're probably going to replicate with some kind of fault or discrepancy, which is why over time we get illnesses. Okay. And the longer you've been living, the more time you've had to create cells that aren't working well. And often that corresponds with something we call menopause or menopause, because it happens in men as well. But it's a correlation between how long you've been on the planet and how long we've had faulty cellular function. And we blame it all on poor old menopause.
Right. Poor old menopause. Yeah. And before we get to there, I want to start almost at the beginning, because just before we press pause, I was saying that pause play, we celebrate the emergence into womanhood and that phase of life where you're going through out of the maiden into the mothering phase, and yet we kind of really disregard the exiting out of that phase of life into, you know, what we would call the crone phase, where you've got the wisdom and you're doing something else. But also the thing that I want to like speak a little bit more on is the feeling of using food as an emotional crutch to deal with emotions. Like for me, I know that I turn to food actually mostly sugary foods, you know, like cakes, jam donuts, really. The main ones.
Let's be specific.
Like out of all the things, if it was, I was never like really into sweets. It was always like cakey things.
Okay.
So I used and lent into food and sugary things to really soothe. From a very early age, I've got images of myself sitting down and literally eating an entire cake because of many things that were happening around me. And in order for me to be able to kind of deal with the emotional wave, the emotion, the feeling of the emotion, the energetics of the environment, to kind of soften how that felt in me, I found a way. I don't know how I put the two together, but somehow knew that going into sugary foods and sometimes like carby things, you know, like kind of really refined breads and so forth, would then really like soften the way that those things came to me. And that has been a lifelong crutch, you know, because now I'm more aware of it. I can recognize where I'm leaning towards it so much more. But then also getting to now this stage, going that, okay, I know that you can kind of get away with certain things, you know, in your 20s and your 30s maybe, and maybe if you're lucky you can kind of skate your 40s with your bad habits, but by then really you need to be reversing it. Otherwise, when you start to move into middle and older age, there you have the problems, and then that's going to be harder, if not less possible, to rectify. So how can we start to work on our emotional leanings into food as early as we become aware of it? Like, how do you speak to that, either with your clients, or how did you deal with it with yourself?
So much there to unpack, and what you said, the very fact that you can now recognize that that's what you were doing as a child, but when you were a child you wouldn't have known that that was what you were doing, because we don't know that we are trying to feel better, and it's usually because we don't have the language or the communication skills or the connection to our emotions. And maybe we've learned very early on that if we say how we're feeling, it may be in some way be taken badly. So depending on our upbringing, if we cry, for example, the classic, oh, don't be a sissy if you're a boy, right? You've got to have a backbone. So suddenly you're now told that certain emotions are bad. you shouldn't feel them, that there's something wrong with you if you do. So we end up kind of shutting down our emotions, or we just don't talk about them. We hold everything in. And that creates a stress response. It's also a trauma response. And when we've got a stress response or any kind of a trauma response, it's all about our hormones. And we don't know it's happening, right? Because we can't see inside. We can't see what the hormones are doing. But as our stress hormones go up, corresponding hormones that make you feel calm, particularly serotonin and the dopamine hormones correspondingly go down. So it's this effect, okay? When you have something that is sweet, and what you mentioned there was very specific, and this is how good your brain and your body and your cells are. They know that the exact balance of sweet to floury foods and fatty foods, right? Just get around about the 50-50 is spot on. So a glazed donut hits that 50-50 of fat to sugar that your brain lights up with. Okay. And it hits what we call the bliss spot, and it helps you to feel calm and relaxed and comforted. Now, let's scoot back a little bit further. When you were a child, particularly if you were breastfed or even if you were bottle fed, there was connection. So your mother would have held you, or whoever was feeding you would have held you in the crook of her arm. There would have been eye contact. Okay. So we're getting that connection, probably skin to skin if you were breastfed. Okay. So we've got this feeling of safety and connection going on, and you're feeding. So this breast milk is naturally sweet. It's that right combination. And the brain knows that and remembers it. So as we're into our childhood and we get this feeling of confusion, emptiness, maybe we've got kind of that ringing out in our tummy, or just an emotion that we don't even know what it is and we can't put it into words, but we don't like it and we don't want it. We turn to these foods because the brain goes, hey, this will make you feel better. Because it thinks it's being helpful. Okay, it's trying to help you to feel calm, to feel safe, to feel nurtured, to feel loved, to feel enough. And when we know it works, and it keeps working, because it does, because it's the right combination and it has the desired effect on the hormones, it just reinforces to your brain that, yeah, this is a really good idea. Keep doing it. It works. And this is where we've got to help people to recognize it's not willpower. This is biochemistry and hormonally led, right? It absolutely is. But what we have to try and then help ourselves to do is not go to that urge and actually look inwards and go, what is it that I'm feeling? And sometimes we genuinely don't know. Sometimes it comes out in a bodily sensation. So it may be that there's a tightness around the throat. It may be that you've got a pain in your shoulder. Maybe it's a headache. Maybe there's an issue with your hip or your knee. But your body is telling you that you need to address this thing. And what we do with food really is just suppress it. We just suppress it. And it's going to keep on persisting. Whatever you resist persists. So until we do turn in and look at it, we'll find that actually when one donut did it, now I need 3. Yeah, because your body's going, hey, do you know what? You still haven't found out what is actually going on. So when we go through the period where we're going and we're coming into womanhood, for a lot of people, if that's been your story, if those are the foods that you've turned to quite a lot because you've had a stressful upbringing or whatever, you don't know that this is going on, but what you've done is upset your hormone balance when it comes to your periods. You're more likely to have premenstrual syndrome. You're more likely to have painful periods. And we don't correlate the foods that we've been eating with the kind of period and the experience that we have. But often that's the case. And so when we go through this, we're then told, oh, don't worry, it's normal, right? Soothe yourself, treat yourself to a cake or a chocolate, make yourself feel better, because it's normal to have sugar cravings in your period. And then, you know what? You're making it worse. Yeah. But we have these associations. And unfortunately, what we're not taught, particularly in this country, and here's where we differ from a lot of other countries. You said some very powerful words there, that when we get to the other end of our cycle, and it's just basically you are now in a position where you can reproduce and keep the species going, right? Now we recognize that you're probably a little bit too old to be able to look after a young person, and now it's your time to shine. to step into the latter stages of your life where you've done all the nurturing, you've done the looking after everybody else. Now it's time for you, right? We, for some reason, see it as a time where it's an ending of something, but it isn't. It's like, hallelujah. It's the beginning of us being able to go, thank goodness I don't have to put up with, that monthly bleed, and I don't have to worry about wearing a swimming costume or is my tummy going to be bloated? Now we can step out and become the wise person and share our knowledge with the younger generation. And that's a time to celebrate. Your body isn't letting you down. What your body feels like and what happens to you when you're going through your menopause, scoot back 20 years, because looking at how you were living, how you were eating, how your body's learned to kind of survive will determine then what kind of a menopause you're likely to have. So if you've always been active, if you've always thought about putting your health and your sleep first, if you haven't turned to caffeine and sugary drinks and what have you, your menopause is probably just, okay, it's just kind of happened. But unfortunately, we're living in a society where we do turn to these foods because they are marketed to us as giving us something. And so we reach in for something external that actually we need to be giving ourselves internally. Food is not love. Okay. If we're preparing a meal with somebody, there's a sense of community and connection, but it's not love. Overfeeding somebody because you love them isn't love. Okay. Forcing them to eat the cake because you made it for them, right? That isn't love. That's control.
Yeah.
So we've got to be really mindful of do I actually know what I'm feeling? And I didn't. Hands up. I had no clue. Absolutely no clue. I didn't have the words to express the emotions that I felt as a kid because there were so many and they were so jumbled up and so confused. And I think that that's the same in today's world. We don't have the ability to be able to say, I'm feeling this way. Or if we do, what often happens is then somebody thinks that they need to fix it for you or make it go away. And I want to say to people, your feelings are there to be felt, right? They're not there to be pushed down. They're not there to be battered away. They're not there to be ignored. They're trying to tell you, hey, do you know what? There is something here that I'm trying to get you to just notice.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's all you need to do. You don't need to do anything with it. You just need to notice it. And what I say to my clients is just say, oh, that's interesting. That's interesting that I feel like that when that happens. Just be interested. And it feels completely different. Oh, I don't like it. I don't want it. Oh, that's interesting. I wonder why. Well, never mind. I don't know why, but I'm not going to ponder on it. But that's interesting. Let it go, because another feeling will come in. Yeah, our emotions are just that, aren't they? Energy in motion, and they're meant to do this. And this is an analogy that I always use. I think of like a running stream, and if you let those emotions just flow, it's just watching them go past. But what we do is we go, that feeling there, I don't like that one. I've learned it's bad, or I shouldn't feel it. We put a dam up. We put this dam up and we hang on to it, and then we focus on it, and we go, and all of these other feelings are backing up. Hey, what about me? Let go of that one, right? And then you can just move on.
Thank you for that. So many questions came up with what you were saying, and especially when it comes to the feelings. What I've been doing over the past few weeks on my other platform is going through feelings and actually looking at the harder feelings that we try and step away from, and actually look at what those feelings are showing us. And allow yourself to feel them, but don't identify with them. And I think maybe that's where people kind of get lost a little bit, because they become like, I am the feeling, like you are experiencing the feeling. But there's that point where you have to be able to move outside of your experience and almost observe yourself going through the period of time that you're going through now. Observe what's happening. I always say, like, journal, like, talk about it if you don't have anyone to speak about it, so that you realize that it's not forever. because
Right.
your head can play a game with you.
It does.
Of you believing that it's going to be forever. And for some reason we've got this idea in society that we should all be happy, so there's this like I don't know, and I see it really kind of turning up now, so that everyone should be happy, or everyone's pretending to be happy, or playing these happy games. And then so many people are going, well, I don't feel like that, I've got anxiety. And then then they're sitting in this space of anxiety that feels to me that it's more prevalent than before. Or maybe people just speak about the fact that they aren't happy anymore. I don't know. I don't know. And but then it's this avoidance of, oh, I'm feeling all of these things and I'm wrong. So then going into if not the food, then the pharmaceuticals to then quash what we're feeling. And then that in itself creates another. And
you said something really powerful there, because I think one of the feelings that we're told is somehow bad, or we shouldn't have, or we should be worried about because we might get labeled with an illness, is anxiety. Mm-hmm. And we need to feel that. It's powerful, right? It's a powerful feeling, and it's not something that we need to be scared of. We need anxiety because it's telling us to be aware. Be aware. Ultimately, our brain has one job, and one job only. That's it. It is to stop us from dying. That's your brain's role. It doesn't care whether you're happy or sad or any other emotion, right? It just wants to stop you from dying. And that means that if you are not anxious about certain things, if you don't feel hypervigilance sometimes, then you're going to potentially, as far as your brain's concerned, die. So we need to embrace anxiety along with joy and happiness and any of the other. When people term these things as negative feelings, stop giving them a label. They're just feelings, and they all have their place. If we didn't have sunshine, we wouldn't know when it was nighttime. We've got to have the opposites to be able to make sense of what feels good, what doesn't feel good. Do some of these feelings feel uncomfortable? Yeah, they do, because they're telling you something, right? And if it's an uncomfortable feeling, then it's saying you need to change the situation, or you need to focus on something else. But if we sit with it and why am I anxious? What's going on? Right? Okay, find out, but don't ruminate. More wise. Allow yourself to just go, okay, so that's probably why. Let me actively take an action, because anxiety, if we want to dissipate it, the fastest way is to take action. And then we're going to feel more different about that situation again, but also recognize that we are in control of our brain. Our brain is not in control of us. And that's something that you're saying there. We think that we can't stop what's happening. Your body is going to tell you a lot more than your brain will.
Talking about the emotions, one of the things that I felt was really important for us to cover is, if I go back to the reasons why I felt that I needed coping mechanisms, was because my mum had a diagnosis of, back in the day, they used to call it manic depression. Manic depression, until it got rebranded.
Yeah.
And one of the things that drew me to speaking to you was because that was something that you spoke to, and the reasons why you felt that what it actually was, as opposed to what we're told that condition is. Yeah. So I want to turn it over to you to speak on that for a moment.
So it's interesting because my mum also had that diagnosis, and it really did affect massively my whole experience of childhood, as I'm sure it did yours. My father couldn't handle mental illness at all, so his way of handling it was to just never be around, to be at work, and so my brother sort of did similar. He would just disappear out of the house, and so it was down to me to kind of somehow be able to manage what was happening. And I was 10 or 11 when she got the diagnosis, and over time, and I'm sure this is probably your experience too, it tends to get worse with age, but also gets worse because the person keeps getting medicated, and the medication has horrendous effects on the person. When I started to have my concerns about my own health, and for me, one of the things that I used to say to myself, and just be careful what you wish for, because you never know what you'll get. When I was going through my eating disorder, one of the things I kept saying to in my head was, I wish I was an alcoholic, because at least I'd be able to stop drinking. Well, there you go. Okay, that happened. So one of the things I also used to say to myself was, the last thing I ever want is to have a mental illness and end up like my mum. So when I started to feel feelings of depression, I was terrified that that is actually what was happening. And I mentioned earlier that it took me a while to get a diagnosis of Hashimoto's thyroiditis, and I had never heard of it. I didn't know what it was. Right? It sounded like some kind of skin disease or something. I didn't know what it was. A thyroid bit I could get, but what's this Hashimoto's? It's named after the person who discovered it. But it's a thyroid issue, and it basically means that your immune system is basically trying to destroy the thyroid cells because it thinks that they are alien to the body, that they're an invader. And what happens is, you can kind of go between the symptoms of low thyroid, the classic one of which is depression, to the extent that you just can't get out of bed. It's such an effort to just function. And then what happens is when your body is kind of destroying the cells, they release the thyroid hormone that's in there, which can then send you into a hyperactive state, which is more the hyperthyroidism, where you're kind of a little bit like a Duracell bunny. And I was just like, oh my God, this sounds like bipolar. This is what my mum was doing. She'd be very, very low, and then suddenly she would have these crazy manic episodes. So the more I researched into helping myself not be on medication, the more I recognized that I'm pretty certain that that was my mum's issue. And the research, and I've tried to find more up-to-date research, but the numbers that I can get is back in 1987, and I know that's ages ago, and I can't find any more up-to-date figures, but 15% of people in psychiatric hospitals for depression actually did not have depression. They had Hashimoto's. And that's in 1987. So let's imagine that that's potentially escalated. It's really difficult. I know, I don't know, but I'm so sure that that was my mum's issue, because I know when she was little, she actually had a thyroid problem. She always had a scar on her neck, and they actually removed some of her thyroid gland, because that's what they did back in the day. And she was never, ever given any medication to look at the function of that. And as far as I'm aware, she was never tested. She was never, ever given a full thyroid panel. And this is something that I have spoken to psychotherapists about this, and they've said it's kind of one of the unknown things that we don't talk about, is that we actually do recognize that a lot of bipolar disorder is misdiagnosed, as is schizophrenia as well, because the similarities between this very low and this high. And one of the things that kind of crosses over is the lack of concentration, forgetfulness. Right? Not kind of being aware of fully where you are and what's going on. And this is all hormonal. And that's where you realize that medication is damping down certain systems, which everything affects everything else. And so that medication is going to have an effect on the hormones, which will potentially make the symptoms even worse. And what's our answer? Well, let's just increase the medication, or let's just try another one, instead of actually looking at what really is the cause. And it often goes back to gut function and back to the microbiome. And if you look at the diet of people who have manic depression, or if you look at the fact that they may have had diseases or a bacterial infection that was never actually treated, which will affect their gut microbiome, which then affects what's happening with the thyroid. And just, there aren't the figures that I can quote out there because I don't think anybody would dare publish them. But from everybody that I've spoken to and all the research that I've done, there is nobody with a mental health diagnosis that doesn't also have issues with their gut function. Right. So, but it's not something that's been looked at. However, I am hopeful that it is now starting to change, but it's a slow process. But when you look at, if you were to put the symptoms of bipolar and the symptoms of Hashimoto side by side, the similarities are kind of stark and glaringly obvious, but people don't get tested. It's frightening. Yeah. And I wouldn't have found that out if I hadn't have been really insistent, because I spent 3 years of feeling the way I was before I plucked up the courage to get a blood test and find out what was going on. But the first year I remember going to my GP and I said, you know what, I am actually a bit concerned that maybe I've got depression. And I was explaining my symptoms: low mood, aching joints, right? Mentally not feeling I was fully able to remember stuff and just genuinely not myself. And she said, oh, it's probably a virus. You had a lot on, it's probably a virus. I went back the following year and I'm like, it's always kind of February, March time. Is it SAD? Is it seasonal affective disorder? If that's what's going on, you know, I went back and she said, oh, let's look at your age. This is 10 years ago nearly now. It is, yeah. You probably early menopause, sounds like early menopause symptoms. And I'm like, okay, right. And in my head, I'm going, well, okay, so I'm not getting a depression diagnosis. I'm kind of okay with this. Third year, I'm like, okay, this is now seriously, what is the matter with me now? So I went back again and she did say, so do you think you're depressed? I can give you some antidepressants. Without any more kind of conversation around it. And she started to type out a prescription. I went, you can stop printing that. I said, I'm not taking it. And I left. And that's when I was like, I have to find out. Fortunately for me, having been in the world of health and wellness, I knew somebody who I could go to, who could do a very comprehensive blood panel. And when he came back with the diagnosis, I was just literally, I've got what? I've got what? But because of my curious brain and him going, well, you could go back to your GP and you can get thyroxine. I went, nope, not doing conventional medication, just not going down that road. Can we do it a different way? And he said, yes, absolutely. But you've got to be vigilant. And I was like, fine. But that's when I wanted to do my research. And as I say, that's when I came up with the connection. And it's shocking. This is 10 years ago. Right. And I kind of found this out more in depth 8 years ago. But we know that therapists, particularly psychotherapists and psychiatrists who can actually prescribe, have been told to look at gut function. And that was part of the ethos. There was a particular paper that came out in 2013. We're in 2024 now. Asking them to look at gut function of their clients before they start giving out a mental health illness label. How many of them do that? I don't know any. Having spoken to my clients,
I'm so far away from that industry that it's, you know, I've been scarred for life because of the experience. Because listening to you say that, I'm like, well, no, why not? Because the thing is, there was always part of me going like, is this really it? Maybe just because I've just got that kind of mind, you know. But of course I wasn't going towards it being anything to do with the gut, you know. That wasn't even on my radar or anything like that. Gut issues and diet have only been things that I've been really aware of maybe for the last 10-12 years of my life, when I made a choice, and that kind of coincided with, so like towards the end of my 30s, seeing kind of the outlay for me, like hereditary and genetically, it was like, okay, because everyone had assumed, especially in the family, that this mental illness was genetic, and it was just a matter of time before, you know, the bomb went off in my head. and whatever it was that was going to trigger that. And also because I was doing things so differently that they looked crazy anyway. Looked crazy anyway. You know, so when you're surrounded by people who've assumed that you're crazy just because you're doing stuff differently, and then you still buy into the idea of genetics being your fate, then, you know, like you're tiptoeing towards something. Until then, I started to realize that things could change. You know, I was starting to see online women who were in their 60s and 70s but had a really good diet, you know, and that's when I cleaned up my diet and started to be a bit more vegetarian and like a vegetable eating vegetarian as well. You know,
you're not a carbitarian.
Because, you know, it sounds crazy to say, but I remember knowing vegetarians and they barely ate vegetables.
I know. That's why I said I label them carbitarians, because it is literally, it's pasta and it's pizza and it's sandwiches and it's toast and it's like, where's the veg in this? You're a vegetarian.
Yeah. So for me, it was like, you know, because prior to that, I remember being at college and the first vegetarian that I ever met was like so spit and sawdust that she put me off the whole idea. You know, this is like 30 years ago or so. So she come to like class with like Ziploc bags with like steamed carrots in and everything. You know, you couldn't get vegetarian food that much. It was like really not.
Well, it was pasta and it was, if you were lucky, it was a cheese sandwich.
It was she come with a Ziploc bags with like bits of carrots and like hemp seeds, and you just like, that looks great. Now that's like, I look at it and my mouth starts watering, you know. But back in the day, that just looked like the most unappetizing food to ever go into. And then, you know, about 20 or so years later, when I'm coming into my 40s, then I'm like, oh, I'm seeing these people who are in their 60s and 70s and 80s, and they're talking about vegetarianism and diet. So because like my fate looked so terrible for me, then I was like, okay, like back out of whatever we're doing now and change and go more vegetarian. And like I said, it's still 10, 12 years ago, you didn't have the plethora of milks or anything that it wasn't like this, because now a lot of this vegan food, it's like junk. It's crazy what that stuff is.
And unfortunately, this is where we've got to understand, or we've got to help people to understand. The food industry and the pharmacological industry and the slimming industry, to be fair, have one goal: is to make money. It's to make you a repeat customer. And anybody listening who's in business will know your best customers are your repeat customers. Okay. It's much easier to keep a customer than it is to attract a new customer, whatever your business is. And I'm afraid to say, food is business. Okay, it is. And snacking was something, we all take snacking to be something that's been around forever. No, that term snacking didn't exist. It was invented by the food companies because they wanted to sell you some food when you weren't actually hungry. Okay, because it makes more money. And these foods were on purpose designed to be easy to eat, so you didn't have to chew them a lot. Okay, versatile, easy to carry, hold in your hand, so not very big, but with a lot of energy in there and a lot of sugar and a lot of fat and a lot of salt. Why? Because those things hit your bliss spot. Put in the right amount of color, put in the right amount of flavoring, we're off, right? You're going to keep on coming back for more. You are hooked. So things like fruit juice, classic, right? If you actually, juiced an orange, a fresh orange, does it look anything like the orange that you get in a carton in the supermarket? No, it doesn't. Okay. But unfortunately, we have all become addicted, right? Not our fault, on purpose by the food industry, to keep coming back for more. And this is where we find it's the vegetarian and now the vegan, they're going, well, okay, we want those as well, right? We don't want these customers going elsewhere. We want them to still shop in our supermarket. And what we've got to some people don't know this. A lot of the food giants, the majority of the food giants, right, were taken over by the tobacco giants. Okay, same psychology on selling you something that is not necessarily good for you, but we're going to market it as it is, Cigarettes were sold with GPs with stethoscopes and their white coats on. Yeah. And so they've got the selling and the marketing psychology down to a T, and you, the consumer, are lapping it up, whether you're vegan, vegetarian, or not. And this is where knowing that that is what's going on is your power, because you can choose to start to go to your farm shop or to the little organic shop, or a lot of where I live, we have some fantastic Asian and ethnic shops that have all kinds of different types of vegetables. And you realize that actually not everybody wants their fruit packed in cellophane and that's been sat on a container that doesn't come from the UK, and then it's been sat in the storage of a depot, and then it's been sat in the supermarket, and your fresh apple's probably not fresh, it's probably about 7 months old, right? But this is what people, I believe, need educating on, because education gives you the power of choice.
Yeah.
And then you can decide if you want to. But this is why, don't be fooled if it's got a healthy label on it. Okay, it is designed to have you coming back for more on purpose, not willpower, not your fault that you have to finish the packet, right? It's been designed that way. And they understand that the more you then fall out with yourself because you can't control yourself, you're going to become a really good customer then for the slimming industry. So I'll just now sell you a slimming product in cahoots with the pharmaceutical industry, so we can keep you in our little loop of all three, right? Going round and round in circles until eventually you get an illness that's going to mean that, oh, damn, now you're costing us money. Do you know what? But we had a good go.
One final one that just push you over there.
Yeah. But this is where, if we can make a choice ourselves, and be different. Be the person who says, no, you know what, I am going to go to the smaller shops, and I am going to, if I can get a space on an allotment or have a share in it, start to learn to grow. And even if you, window boxes, you can start to grow some vegetables yourself. I'm not advocating that we be perfect and we never eat these fun foods, right? Because we're here, we live life, we are living in this world. But understand that those foods were never meant to be your daily diet, ingested multiple times. Different colors, different varieties, different textures, different types of fruits and vegetables and grains that have basically, my northern roots coming out, not been mucked about with, are what we want to be aiming for 80% of the time, right? You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be OTT or go down the road of orthorexia either, right? But just recognize that a small amount of these foods is unlikely to do a lot of damage if the majority of the time you're eating well. But if it's the other way around, hormonally, you're not going to have a great time with your periods when you're younger, potentially. You're not going to necessarily have great skin. You're not necessarily going to have the brain function that you potentially could have. You're certainly not, when you're older, then going to perhaps experience the menopause as being this, well, hey, right, this is my time now to shine and let me step into feeling an awesome woman, because it should just be, menopause is the day that your period ends. That's it. Okay. And it should just be like another day. That it shouldn't be this dramatic thing. But it's not just food, and we've got to recognize that our thyroid isn't affected just by our food. The other things that affect our gut are the stuff that's in our environment, and unfortunately that is out of our control. But also the stuff that we put on our skin. And as women, cosmetic industry as well sees us coming. Yeah, so this is where we've got to be savvy and go, okay, you know, I don't want to be eating out of plastics. I don't want to be putting stuff on my face that's actually also got plastics in it. Ideally, I don't want to be drinking water that's still got the remnants of contraceptive pills and antidepressants in it. Thank you very much. I'm going to use a water filter, or I'm going to, you know. So there's small things that we can do, and they don't have to be expensive. But the first step, and you said it yourself, is you have to make the choice for yourself. how do I want to feel moving forward? Because how I eat now today is going to determine how I feel in 10 years' time, how my body functions when I'm 65. Yeah. And I want it to be flipping better than it is now, definitely not worse. And so that's my motivation. I want to be one of those women in the gym who's still doing pull-ups at 75. Right? That is my mission. It's not everybody's cup of tea, but somebody else might want to run a marathon or do an Ironman or just be able to run around in the garden and pick up the kids without worrying about, oh, am I going to fall over? Am I going to break a hip? And I think that if we can go into thinking about how do I want my old age to be, it just allows you to make better choices today.
And then I'd add on that as well. And if you can't even find the motivation for yourself at this point, how is it going to affect your family?
Yeah.
Because if you're not doing it for yourself and you think it's too much of a problem, it's going to be somebody else's. It's going to be someone else's problem. It's probably, you know, maybe it's a strong word, but, you know, it becomes an emotional weight on people that they feel they can't break out of. There's so much there that I could talk about, you know.
That is funnily enough, that is one of the things that I do actually bring up with my clients, because there's a lot of women who feel guilty about putting themselves first. Right. And they, you know, they've got family to look after. Business comes first, partner comes first, kids come first, my health comes last. And often they can't see that actually if you can look after your health first, you'll be able to do all of the rest of the stuff much more easily. But if they can't, I use exactly that. And I say, so you're looking at your mum now and you're telling me how hard it is for you to fit in going to hospital appointments, and she fell over and now she's not functional and mobile, and you're wondering whether she's going to be safe in her own home. Do you want that to be your legacy for your daughter?
Right.
And they're like, no. I went, okay, so now is the time to be doing something about it, because your mom is already there. It's a bit too late for her, although it's never too late for her to make some changes. But you also need to be setting an example to your daughter too. So it's if you can't do it for yourself, as you've said, absolutely, I do say that to my clients, right? Think of your kids, right? Think of your partner, and think of how other people will be affected by you because you chose, powerful word, not to prioritize your own health.
True word has never been spoken, you know, and it is absolutely a choice. Vicky, thank you so much. There's so many ways that we can go, but I love what we covered in this time. Can you just let everybody know where they can connect with you and get involved with your work?
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you. LinkedIn. I am Vicky Midwood on LinkedIn. My website is vickymidwood.com, and you can connect with me on Facebook as Vicky Midwood as well. I am also on TikTok, and I am on Instagram as Vicky_GFC, which stands for Go Figure Coaching, because health doesn't have to be hard. Go figure.
Thank you, Vicky, for sharing your wisdom with me, and thank you for listening. Find out more about me on my website. That's carolmaywhittick.com, carolmaywhittick.com. You can connect with me on social media, Facebook and LinkedIn. I'm there as Carol May Whittick, and on Instagram, Casmic, CAZMICK. Until the next episode, take care of yourself. Thanks for listening again. Bye-bye.